name David Legg first. David Legg and Keith Wilson. Let me give a little bit of an intro, and then I'll get out of the way because I want to get to the debate. And I have a coin for a coin toss to flip for who goes first. David Legg was at the University of Lethbridge when I was at the University of Calgary, and he was involved in freedom politics even back then, helping to root out a communist students' union. Communists in Lethbridge? Who'd have thunk it? David went on to an illustrious international career, returning to Alberta from his successful work in Asia to help root out Rachel Notley, to help unite the right. And then, at probably a 95% pay cut, he helped mend fences with investors around the world, letting them know that Alberta was open for business again. And he helped create the Invest Alberta Crown Agency, which has since brought tens of billions of dollars back to Alberta. He's someone who I've known for 35 years, and I've never once disagreed with a word that he said, which makes it tough for me because Keith Wilson, who I've known since law school, when we were in the freedom-oriented laissez-faire club at the U of A together, fighting against the commies in that law school. I've known Keith. He was with the Farmers Advocate. He was for property rights advocacy, and most recently, you might know him as the lawyer for the trucker convoy. He was the guy who went toe-to-toe with those police chiefs who overreached and had such an important role there. And here's the trouble. I've never recalled disagreeing with anything that Keith has said. So here are two men who I trust implicitly, who I've known since I was a young man in school. They both have impeccable records of true support for Alberta and Alberta-ness, if I can make up a word. And yet they disagree on one question, which is, what is the path forward for Alberta now? And that is the debate that I know I'm going to learn so much. David Legg has the position, and I'll let him properly describe his own views, that Alberta should fight for its rights and strengthen its position within Canada. Keith has the point of view that Alberta should become independent and strengthen its rights that way. And what a debate we're in for. These are two intellectual powerhouses. One's a PhD and one's a KC, if you're into fancy accreditation. This really is a top-notch battle. Now, we've agreed on the rules in advance, and we've got a coin toss. Can I, because I've got my hands full, can I deputize you to do the coin toss? If you toss, then David picks, and we'll see who goes first. Go ahead. So what was it?
He won heads.
Okay.
Okay, well, sorry, if Keith is starting by being that honest.
I'll just say that we have, and if we could just make sure we can muffle the echo, thank you. I just want to very quickly, this is my last comment, then I'll sit down. I just want to tell people what the outline of the debate is. And now I'm panicking because I don't have it right at my fingertips. You know what? Thank you very much. Let me read it from here. Opening statements, 10 minutes each. There'll be rebuttals in between. So David will go first for 10 minutes, then Keith will rebut for 5. Then Keith will go for 10, and David will rebut for 5. Then I will do my best to put thoughtful questions that hopefully will not become little speeches. Then we'll take audience questions, and then 5 minutes closing per side. So without further ado, unless there's any questions or corrections, I propose we start. Is Isaac here. Isaac, can you come right to the front? I'd like you to be the timekeeper. When we have 5 minutes left, put your hand up like that, and then count down 4, 3, 2, 1. When the time is up, just stand up, and we'll all get the picture. So thank you for being the timekeeper. Without further ado, David Legg, take it away.
Great. Well, I'll tell you before, first of all, if Ezra persists in asking for something, he usually gets his own way, you know. We go, I can't believe it's 35 years, but I just want to say Keith is a gentleman and a scholar, and I've been following what he's been writing, and I agree with almost everything. So the hard thing for me is, you know, taking a perspective on something where I agree with a lot of the approach that I think should be taken, but tactically I think that Keith and I do have a disagreement in terms of how we win. And that's what I want to focus on. So I'll take my 10 minutes to just walk through how I see the current situation that we're in, how I think that we win, and then I'll respond to some of the things that Keith has to say. First of all, I want to say thank you to Dallas Brody. What an inspiration to have somebody have that level of courage. You know, you used a great phrase, which is cultural Marxism, and I think that is part of what we're fighting as a conservative movement in so many places. And I think that part of the stakes that Keith and I are debating relate to the fact that we're not just making economic arguments about how Alberta can be successful in the world. We're also making a cultural argument about the kind of society that we want our kids and our grandkids to grow up in. The stakes are very high, and we're fighting not just for the legislature in Edmonton or the parliament in Ottawa or some of our municipal city councils. I think we're fighting for the hearts and minds of the next generation with a set of ideas about what it means to be human, what it means to be loved by God, what it means to be raised in a place where people honor who you are and you're not reduced to your preferences or your rights or a lot of these things that come with this package of cultural Marxism that's somehow taken over the way that people think about themselves these days. And so my premise, as I sort of look at the discussion that we're trying to have, is whether and how we can create the conditions of greater independence for Alberta and Albertans versus see separatism as a mechanism for independence. And in that distinction, I think, resides whether or not we win or we lose. And I think we win by pursuing a series of incremental, successful battles that we know we can win, rather than focusing ourselves on a massive war, which is separatism, that we have a very good chance of losing for a lot of reasons that don't relate to how good that argument is, but how possible achieving that win will be. I think the goal that we're after, it's funny, I was saying to Ezra when it came in, they were playing the Yankee Doodle anthem, you know, that Union fighting song. She marched, and I said, is that my last cigarette before Keith shoots me on the stage? This guy's a 30-year Crown prosecutor in King's Counsel, and this is my first debate in, you know, I think since we were in high school or something. But I think when you think in military terms, you think about strategy and you think about tactics. And when you think about strategy, and I have a background in strategy from running strategy for a large bank, you always think about what your key goal is. And I think our key goal, as I've outlined, is that we try and create the best conditions for our kids and our grandkids to thrive, to be able to build a great business, to be able to raise a great family, to be able to live in a society that is an opportunity society that gives them the freedom to become everything they can be with the best possible set of conditions for doing that. And when I came back to Canada, well, I'll go forward. When I was working overseas, I left when I was 23. I went to grad school in the States in England. I ended up working overseas. I couldn't believe it when I got a call saying that the NDP had won in Alberta. Just couldn't believe that could happen in Alberta. I also couldn't believe it that the reason the NDP won is that conservatives decided to fight each other instead of the leftists. And it allowed the left to go straight up the middle. And then in 4 short years, as I started getting more and more phone calls, finally in 2018, I got the call from my buddy Jason Kenney, who said, look, I've been trying to unite the right. I'd love you to come back. You're very good at finance, and I think you should help us get the economy back up and running and help deal with this balance sheet problem. And I was working as an exec. I was running that was the head of strategy for a global bank. And I just could not fathom what had happened when I looked at the balance sheet. So I resigned my role. I did come back. I got to work on Jason's campaign. We wrote a large, you probably remember some of us, we wrote this large policy manual that was partly my doing, with all kinds of promises that we said we would keep. But I came back and I thought, in 4 years, the left has managed to print $48 billion in debt. They've decimated and politicized our schools. They've created, my brother John lost his job. My brother Andrew had lost his job. I came back to Lethbridge, where I grew up, and I noticed Lethbridge had become crime-ridden. The downtown had this drug site going on in it. I don't know if any of you have been down there, but it was absolutely extraordinary to see what had happened. So we came back. We ran on a set of promises that we would turn this thing around. We won. We got to work on initiating those promises. I got to work largely on the economic files. I did a lot of work on APP. We put that in the vault, and we decided we're going to pull that out of the vault when we fixed AIMCO, because if we take APP out of the vault too fast and run that as a strategy, which, by the way, is one of the most important single things you can do to give Alberta a lot of its capital back and to give Albertans a lot of their capital back. But if you try and do that strategy before you've achieved the hearts and minds of convincing all Albertans that it's the right thing to do, you set yourself up for failure, because you can't actually pass it without the popular support for it. I worked on the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation so that we could remove the excuse of Indigenous lands in Treaty 6, 7, and 8, rejection of energy infrastructure. I worked on our ESG strategy over in Europe and Asia to get that removed, to counterattack that so that we could get funding back in. Yeah, and we won. We won that. Do you remember during the campaign the slogan about if you boycott us, we'll boycott you? To HSBC? Well, I went to HSBC and we got a handshake from Noel Quinn, the CEO of HSBC, to remove that language from the ESG policy. We did the same thing with Barclays. The CBC wrote a long story that the NDP gave them that I was flying back and forth to London for some mysterious reason because I liked economy class flights and hotels in London or something. The left will resent whatever we do. But the story of that experience for me is that we began to win. And today, Alberta is winning. It may not feel like it sometimes, and I know we're at a meeting to talk about separatism or independence, but right now we have the highest net income in Canada, we have the fastest population growth in Canada, we have the highest investment rate in Canada, we have the most educated workforce in Canada, we have the fastest in-migration for economic purposes in Canada. We have a series of investments come in. We set up Invest Alberta Corp only 4 years ago. And in only 4 years after we pulled that out of our bureaucracy and we started to run it independent, we've had over $27 billion in investment come into this province with over 38,000 jobs. Alberta is Narnia to the rest of the world. I did an investment event in Banff. People love this province. A couple friends of mine are in the new Trump administration, so I went down for them for the inauguration, which is a great party. I got a lot of 51st state teasing going on. But the fact is we were able to create and define an Alberta that could win and succeed. Right now, this last year, we came very close to losing the provincial election again. We only got 8 seats in Calgary. This year we did lose the federal election. If you have an opportunity to sort of think about the 4 or 5, let's say you're king for a day, queen for a day, you could write 4 or 5 laws. What laws would you write to make Alberta the best place in the world for your kids and grandkids to grow up? What would you pass? This is a wild crowd. The things that you want to accomplish as conservatives, we believe that 80% of what you want to accomplish, you can accomplish in your own life. Doing your own thing, you can accomplish it for yourself and your family. When it comes to the rules of government, there are sets of things that we can do, but right now the biggest challenge in front of us as conservatives is not the architectural federalism in Canada. The biggest challenge in front of us is winning back the seats that will decide the future of Calgary. It's winning the hearts and minds that will deliver the elections we need to win in Edmonton. It's passing the legislation that we need to pass. Is that time? To deliver the kind of promise that we want to have. I'm going to pass it to Keith, and we're going to have a chance to talk more about specifically what I think we have to do. But I think as a conservative movement, the critical thing that we have to avoid is the division that will be created by starting new parties when we're this close right now to holding on to and consolidating the power and the influence we have in Alberta, which is winning, and being able to deliver that as we negotiate with the feds for what comes next. I'll pass it to Keith in the return.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, the bravest person in this room is Tamara Leach, and the second bravest person is David. Thank you. And I commend him for agreeing to participate in this. You know, David talks about the importance of us adopting military strategies and tactics and things. I'm tired of fighting for the future of my children when the opportunities are right here but are being deprived of them because the ideologues in Ottawa are on some crazy ideological fantasy. If we can put our energies into applying our skills, taking advantage of our vast resources, using our entrepreneurial talents, not being constantly obstructed, not having this knee on our neck. That's where I want to get to. I have considered and thought for a long time, my undergraduate degree over 30 years ago is in political science, and particularly the history of Canada. And the problem goes deep. The problem goes to the core of how this country was formed. And I just don't see why it's a preferred option to try and fix Canada. And the other point I would make is, you know, you need a level of homogeneity, you need a level of commonness, you need a level of shared vision, a shared understanding, a shared mission to have a nation. And we have that in Alberta. We have that from Wainwright to Pincher Creek, from Grande Prairie to Medicine Hat. Hardworking, get knocked over, dust yourself off, and get back at it, right? Just like the homesteaders and everybody else. That's part of our culture. That's not the culture of Central Canada. I've spent a lot of time there. And the focus there is about what the government's going to do for them and how the government's going to solve their problems. Albertans are interested in why governments are in their way and how are they going to get out of their way so they can get shit done. So we simply don't have the homogeneity to have a viable country, in my view. You need some commonality. And as time goes on, it's becoming increasingly apparent that we don't have it. The other point I would make is that the structure is just against us. And the structure is that we all know the elections are decided in Quebec and Ontario. They drive the agenda. It doesn't matter what we think. And the only way to change that structure would be to convince the people in Quebec and Ontario to change the Constitution, to give us more power. But they don't like us, and they don't agree with us, so they're never going to agree with that. So I kind of feel like we're in a bad marriage, and we can go to counseling all we want. We're not going to reconcile, and so I think we should put our energies into becoming a free and independent country, and not in trying to convince Ottawa and Ontario and Quebec that there's a way forward with us together with them, because I don't think there is.
I didn't realize it when I said the order, but having Keith rebut David and then Keith making his own presentation means I think you're up again. So I didn't think that through all the way, but unless you want to just continue to alternate, the idea was a speech and then a rebuttal and then a speech and then a rebuttal. But I think if the two of you is just, yeah, okay. Now, did you want to come up to the podium to do it? I recommend that. Sure. Okay, cheers. Here's David Legg.
Great. I'll take another 10 minutes now since I got the mic. Huh? Look, I think the question for me, I want us to win. This is the thing I said to Jason when I came back. I said, I'm here to fucking win. I want to destroy the NDP. I'm not happy with these half-assed little moments. I can't stand the fact that people that believe in these bizarre things are winning in Calgary. I can't believe that that is what has happened. And there's three things that have gone wrong that we have to own as conservatives if we want to take on any battle, but particularly if we want to take on a war as complicated. And trust me, I sued the federal government in a federal court and I won. It took 3 years to win the Dow deal and reverse the SEPA legislation and the bizarre, unscientific, unconstitutional, unreasonable, in the words of the federal court judge, use of the SEPA Legislation Act by Stephen Gilboa to try and call plastic toxic, which is insane. And we had to convince, if you can believe this, we had to convince one of the largest companies in the world, Dow, to sue the federal government of the country that were trying to invest $12 billion, right? That's a big ask. We spent a lot of time in Texas convincing them to sue our federal government with us to invest in Alberta. That's not your classic economic development strategy, right? But we won. We won. I love to win. I hate to lose. There are a bunch of battles that we can win, but you can't win them just by wanting to win them. When I was running strategy for the bank, we had to keep being as honest as we possibly could with ourselves, not about what we wanted, but what we could actually achieve, win, consolidate our ownership, gain momentum, and become bigger and better until you can take on the bigger and better challenges. And right now, the key distinction that I think we have to face is that the structure, as Keith said, is against us. And when the structure is against you, you have to be tactically smart enough to beat the structure. And the way that we have to beat this structure right now is we cannot divide ourselves on the right like we did before and lose to the NDP because we make our own people feel demoralized, so they stay home instead of getting out, putting the shoes on, and voting for us and convincing the 5 or 6 seats we lost in Calgary to go blue, right? We can't afford to do this again. And so I believe that there's a series of battles we can win. I think we can win APP, but I can tell you right now, that is a battle royale. I've talked to the CEO of Canada Pension Plan Investment Bank. I know him. We go for lunch once every quarter. He always asks me, what are you doing now with the APP thing? I tell him, we're going to figure it out. But he knows, and I'm clear, we intend to win that. Because the structure is against us, 2 things. One, I think we need the Quebec model. I think we need to start with following up with what they've got and making sure that we've got what they've got. I think that gets us a long way towards the level of independence we need to create the right conditions for the kind of independence that allows us to create prosperity for our grandkids. And we have to remember that back when I left and back when I was, hanging with these guys, we went from being mocked openly in the press every single day for this crazy party called Reform that the West wants in. We were such a joke out east. I remember I was with a guy named Danny Nassar, a Lebanese guy, who was doing a master's in public policy at Queen's, and the professor said, which people here believe that we should do X? And it was me and the Lebanese dude from Calgary putting up our hand. Me from versus the Lebanese guys from Calgary putting up our hand. And the professor looked at the 60 students and said, what do they have in the water in Alberta? I mean, it's always you two. But the fact is, back then, we went from being mocked to running the country. We had the best prime minister we've had in recent history, Stephen Harper. We had guys like Stockday. We had Preston Manning. We have others. We can win by winning a bunch of battles incrementally. We can set ourselves up so it's not just us. We have to defeat the stuffed shirt Abby. We have to make sure that we bring this home. I've got to pass this to Keith. I'm going on.
How many minutes do I get? How many minutes do I get?
I think you have actually 12.
Okay. So, one of the things that David's emphasized rightly, in my view, is hearts and minds. And hearts and minds can be influenced by things that make us happy, things that make us optimistic, things that make us excited about the future and the present. And hearts and minds are also won by fear. And the reality is, we didn't know in this last federal election which Mark Carney was at risk of getting elected. And we now know it was the Mark Carney of the book values. Mark Carney has announced that we can have pipelines as long as they are decarbonized. I am going to start a new product line of water. It's going to be so cheap to ship because it's going to be called dewaterized water. It's going to be amazing. You can pour it over your head and you'll be dry. It'll be so cool. It'll be awesome. We'll probably sell as much of it as we will decarbonized oil. But more seriously, when he announced that we will only have major projects, that we will only have a pipeline if every single premier consents, that turns our Constitution, as flawed as it is, on its head. That means whatever pet peeve the premier of Prince Edward Island might have, he can say to the federal government, well, I'm not consenting to the Northern Gateway through BC unless you give me X, Y, and Z. It's absolutely dysfunctional. And the reality is, the cost of living is skyrocketing. We're in increasing level of debt. The younger generation is incredibly pessimistic about their future. Most of them aren't having kids for lots of pessimistic and economic reasons. And it's only going to get worse because he's taking the laws and the concepts that have caused $500 billion worth of development and investment to leave and making it even harder. So I think when it comes back to the hearts and minds, we need to simultaneously and with emphasis, as many of us do, talk about how much better off we would be, our kids and our grandkids and their futures will be in a free and independent Alberta, because we know the math. We send a whole bunch of money to Ottawa and they give it to Quebec and other provinces. We wouldn't have to send that money to them. Not only that, we would not have this economic regulatory knee on our neck, so we can produce more of our products, we can value add more of our products, we can have refineries here instead of sending unrefined product, all of these other things. So we can show the optimistic thing. While we're telling that story, in real time, the real Mr. Carney is going to be unleashing his fantasies on us. It's going to get worse. What did he announce last week? 2 days ago, was it? That he's suddenly going to go to our 2% NATO contribution in 1 year, $9 billion? We don't have $9 billion, right? So that's going to have an effect. He's going to keep going and going and going. Things are going to get more serious. Things are going to get worse. The housing shortage is going to get worse. So I think we need to also illuminate the reality that we face under this government in Ottawa and their crazy ideological mindset. So if we can help Albertans, those who don't know which way to decide on this, the optimism of the future with the dark reality of our predicament, I think that's how we win over more hearts and minds. Yeah, and the other thing I want to emphasize is what's so unique about our situation, and I think I talked about this when Ezra had interviewed me on his program, is most countries, like just about all of them, don't have a legal process for separation. In fact, in most countries, if we held this meeting, right about now, there would be buses, police buses pulling up, and we'd all be hanging out together for the next 10 years in jail, right? So this is perfectly legal, which is highly unusual. So we have this legal pathway that the Supreme Court of Canada has laid out in the 1998 reference case that says if a clear majority of the voters in a province vote on a clear question to leave the country, they're allowed to do it. So we need to remind people this isn't some crazy idea, and with all due respect, like this idea that, oh, the Statute of Westminster 1931 and somebody didn't sign something and therefore we're a sovereign country already. I'm sorry, that's just crackery. It doesn't work in the real world, but this other pathway does. So if we can have people have confidence that it's real, and the other point, and Ezra illuminated this with his talk and the slide he put up, is we need to spend the time over the next several months answering people's questions. The work needs to be done to develop a detailed plan so people, when they say to themselves, well, what's going to happen to my mortgage if Alberta separates? What's going to happen to my life insurance? How are we going to have a military? What currency are we going to use? Am I still going to be able to bank at my bank? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to answer those questions. We need to lift the fog, because if we can lift the fog and provide the clarity, that will give the confidence and help overcome the fear. Thank you.
Now, are we doing rebuttals or are we going into questions? Should we hop into questions, or did you expect a rebuttal, David? David gets a 5-minute rebuttal. Okay, go ahead.
So, you know, you came for a debate. I keep agreeing with, I'm taking notes on what Keith is saying. I'm like, geez, that's good, you know? I was really hoping, guys, I wasn't going to say I had to rebut it, because I don't have anything that smart to say. In fact, I said to Ezra before I came in, I said, you know, I'm going to stand up there, and people are going to be like, is this guy bright? And the guy next to him is going to say, he's debating Keith, so clearly not, you know? Anybody dumb enough to come to an event like this and debate Keith on separatism is not bright enough for his opinion to matter that much, so just discount that, you know? Let me say this. I think to maybe put a sharper edge on my perspective, I very much agree with Dr. Dennis Maudray and what he is doing. He is the front line of a hearts and minds strategy that is an essential part of people understanding what the options for Alberta are, what the potential for Alberta is, thinking bigger about what Alberta can be. I disagree with the Republican and the Independence parties, because I hate the effect of splitting our conservative movement in a way that will result in us losing, okay? And I also hate the tactical ambition that takes us too far into something that sounds grand but ends up failing and leaves people feeling cold and disenfranchised. People in this room that care enough to come out to an event like this, care enough to want to build something that will put us and put our kids and our grandkids into a better place. I want to see us fight the fights that I know that we can create the conditions for winning with. And winning is hard. It took us 3 years to win one deal against these feds. They are wily and crafty, and they do not honor our Constitution or the Constitution our founders set up. But that doesn't mean that they're right, or that their rules, or that them winning for 10 years should be the conditions that we accept and react to. This country belongs to us. It belongs to our kids and grandkids. I want the conservative movement of Canada to defeat EB and his weird green anti-scientific dogma and build a pipeline that takes our cleaner gas to China and India. And I want us to be able to convince Canadians that our gas in China and India does more for the environment than any single thing that any Liberal government has ever done in history or will ever do in history. And so when Keith and I have a punch up on the margins about the tactics, the reason that I have PTSD from tactics is because it took me years to get a single deal done, and I know that the kinds of deals we need to get done will require relentless, constant tactical attention. It can't just be something where we tweet saying, how great would it be to have an Alberta pension plan? I ran the analysis with Morneau Chappelle that's now LifeWorks. That's tough analysis. You know the feds are still hiding behind their assessment of that analysis because they know the analysis we did is correct. They are so scared of the reality of how big a proportion of CPPIB Alberta owns because of our advantages demographically in terms of net income and our employment advantages. So when Keith and I are rebutting, I just have to say, I think the critical distinction that I want to make is definitely for the hearts and minds strategy that make Albertans aware of what our potential is, definitely against dividing our parties on the right by making separatism something that becomes a litmus test for whether or not you really back a conservative movement. I do not like this Republican in name only stuff in Alberta. It killed us one time. It gave the left only 4 years, and I wish we could have those 4 years back. Right? We have to start winning on those counts. If we win on those counts, we'll win for the next generation.
Thanks very much. Well, if I'm reading things right, now we go to the stage where I ask questions, 5 questions of the candidates, and then we're going to open it up to public questions. Now, guys, I've written 6 questions down, 3 for each of you, so I propose to alternate. And so I'll ask the first one to you, David, and of course Keith can chime in afterwards, but these are designed for you. The first one, David, is what you've proposed, and even your example of suing the government in federal court. Doesn't the system work against us? Didn't we just learn that lesson the hard way with the defeat of Pierre Poilievre? Doesn't the very fact that you're fighting uphill prove that no matter how hard we try within the system, it's rigged? The playing field is not level. The system is inherently against Alberta.
That's a great question. I think the answer is sometimes we'll lose some fights. We didn't win every court battle we initiated. But here's something that I think is interesting for us to think about. Alberta never used to sue the federal government and win, right? We never used to fight. Alberta doesn't have, you know, my worst nightmare is we would actually win a separatist referendum, and because we lost the hearts and minds game, we would end up with the NDP government running a separate sovereign Alberta, right? We did it one time. I mean,
it's one of my
laugh
questions for Keith.
We did it one time. So can we win? Yeah, but we have to win, and we have to get better at fighting in courts. We have to get better at utilizing the federal system that we've got. And I think the number one way we do that is we imitate what Quebec's got, and we demand what Quebec's got.
Keith, do you have any answer to my question that I put to David?
Yes, and I'm just going to stand up because I know Tamara's really short and she won't be able to see me. And I think David should too, for the benefit of the audience. First of all, you know, fighting the federal government in court, that's great for us, for lawyers, but you know what? I really don't need another boat. I need my kids to be able to buy a house. And the other one is, okay, we won in court. We won a lot in court, which is remarkable given the composition of the court. But one of the things we won was they ruled that the Federal Environmental Assessment Act is an intrusion into provincial jurisdiction. And they were right. And what has the federal government done? Nothing. Not only that, even if they did something, the Act still contains Section 22 sub 1S that mandates every impact assessment for a project. So think about you're building something, all right? You got to go through all these hoops. It actually says, and it was the Trudeau Liberals that brought this in, you as the proponent have to demonstrate and account for the intersection of sex and gender with other identity factors in evaluating the project's effect. And no one can even agree on what the phrase intersection means other than it's not something with traffic lights, okay? So this is what we're up against.
Thanks, Keith. My next question I wrote with you in mind, and I'll ask David to add on after your answer. Keith, I've looked at some secession movements around the world. Quebec, Czechoslovakia, now Czechia and Slovakia, even Brexit, getting out of the EU, and the Irish Rebellion. In every one of those cases, there's an ethnicity difference. Can you have a cohesive independence movement based on ideas as opposed to blood and soil ethnic nationalism? Is it possible that Albertans will choose independence from their cousins in Ontario if there's no Alberta ethnicity?
Well, I think there is an Alberta identity. And one of the things that's remarkable, if you look at the history of our country, or of our province, soon to be a country, Freudian slip, is that when we opened up the prairies under Macdonald's plan at the turn of, late 1880s and into the early 1900s, there was immigrants that came from Ukraine, right? The whole area from Vegreville, Two Hills. There was immigrants that came from all these different European countries, from Holland and so on. And even though we have all this different background, we formed this common view, this common identity. So I think it is possible, and I'm going to slip in an answer to a question you didn't ask because I really want to do this, is one of the things that people have asked because they've been concerned about Premier Smith's comments about she's going to fight whatever she can to keep Alberta and Canada and all that stuff. If at the end of the day the referendum is successful and the majority vote on a clear question, the Supreme Court of Canada said the negotiations must begin for independence. The Supreme Court of Canada did not rule unless the Premier doesn't support it. So the Premier will have no choice but to carry forward the negotiations for independence.
Well, I hate to give Keith this one, but I think the best example of a multicultural, non-pure ethnic separatist movement was U.S. independence. They did a pretty good job of separating out and becoming a superpower from an overarching British system that's taxed. The hard thing, by the way, if you get a call from Ezra and he persists and he makes you do something like this, you start doing some homework, and I just thought, oh no. Keith's gonna savage me in front of a bunch of people. He's gonna nail me down on the U.S. independence and what I don't like about it. I love it. And I think Alberta can get there. My argument would still be, though, the ideas that we believe should shape the inspiration around being a city on a hill nation, those ideas, whatever we want to say those ideas would be, that would make Alberta the destination for people that want to build a new society, that level of inspiration, right? Those ideas are the ones that we have to start to sell people on now in places we already have political control over, like Calgary and Edmonton. If you can't win hearts and minds in Calgary, how are you going to win hearts and minds for a new nation, a new city on a hill? The conservative philosophy of life and politics is so superior to this cultural Marxism And this destructive leftist debt spending, WEF fashion that changes every 3 years, fake environmentalism, we're so far ahead, but if we're not winning hearts and minds in the places we already have control, and we're watching our cities decline, or we're losing control of our province, or we're within a hair's breadth of losing at the next election, let's sort out our definition of what we can be as a province with what we've currently got, because at some point in the future, maybe we will be the next version of the United States in a freer society. But right now, we've got a lot of wood to chop right here at home, winning back this province, which we should have complete control over given the superiority of our movement.
Thank you. Well, David, I'm going to ask you to get on your feet again in a moment. Historically, what Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC think often doesn't matter. The election is decided sometimes before the polls even close here. And the votes in Parliament are heavily weighted to Central Canada. So isn't the threat of independence a great or else that any premier of Alberta can use? That's how Quebec has used it. Give us this or else. Even if Alberta doesn't separate, isn't a referendum every now and then good to encourage Ottawa to behave?
Getting Ottawa to behave is a great turn of phrase. Actually, I don't think we can do it that way. I think when I talk to friends of mine about this, I think the clock has turned. I think that many Albertans are dead serious about saying, if this country can't get its act together, we will not be pulled along into a place that is at odds with what we think our kids and grandkids want to live in. I think that people have had it. And I also think it's sort of a rule of, and Keith would know this given his career, I think when you're authentic, and I think when you speak from the heart, and I think where you mean what you say and you say what you mean, which is the Alberta way, people know it. And I think the fear factor, I don't think the East has got the fear factor yet, but I think they'll get it. And we're going to have a couple private dinners with a few of the new cabinet under Prime Minister Carney in Calgary. And he's going to get, these guys are going to get some very clear messages. We are not playing games. The sentiment in Alberta has shifted, and I think it's shifted fundamentally, and Keith has written about this actually. It used to be that if you said separatism, it was sort of like your funny uncle from Coaldale, right? I'm from Lethbridge, but in Lethbridge you throw stones at Coaldale. In Coaldale they throw it at Tabor. No one in Calgary seems to know where Lethbridge is, so no one throws stones at us. But I think our opportunity is to actually argue this, and Keith and I had a conversation beforehand. Our arguments are intentional, they are personal, they are actually what we mean. And I mean what I'm saying about being fearful about the division of this and getting our priorities right. And so I think, although it does have the effect of keep making Ottawa behave, and I think it should have that effect, I don't think we could ever manufacture it. I think we just are who we are. And who we are is winning right now compared to everywhere else in the country. And Ottawa should be paying attention to the fact that we are the economic engine of this country and way ahead of the rest of the country and reaching escape velocity.
Just FYI, I didn't mean it as a trick. I mean, I think many Quebec separatists are very authentic. They're just not successful, but it is, in the minds of Ottawa. So I'm not saying it would be as a trick.
I agree with that, yeah. I agree with that.
Go ahead, Keith.
The reason that people in Calgary don't throw rocks at Lethbridge, they actually do. It's just the wind blows them away. Come on, David. The difference between Quebec separatists and doing their leverage is they're getting our money. They're not going to suddenly say, yeah, okay, we like you, Alberta, and yeah, we don't want your money anymore, or we don't need your money. And I guess the most practical thing I would say, that if my daughter came to me and she was in a really bad relationship, and she said to me, Dad, I'm thinking of threatening of leaving, and I did that, And now he's stopped, and I'm making this up, by the way, and he's now stopped drinking, right? Okay, great. And then, a month later, well, he's drinking again, and I threatened to leave, and now he's starting to take the garbage out. And I'm going to say, you know what? I don't think you should threaten anymore. It's time for you to go. He's not good for you. He needs to move on with his crazy decarbonized oil, and you get on with your life.
Keith, I have a question for you, and I think David already alluded to it. Don't Rachel Notley and Amarjeet Sohi and Naheed Nenshi show that some of the worst people towards Alberta are from Alberta or in Alberta, and were it an independent place, that would not necessarily save us from carbon taxes or out of control immigration or other bad ideas?
Well, I mean, there's people that have look at the world through two different lenses, we all know. Some people are completely fixated on the imbalance of wealth, on those who are disadvantaged, and not realizing that there's ways to help people that don't require government stripping people of their rights and wealth. And so we're always going to have those people amongst us. But what I think is really important as well, and it's sort of related to your question, but it goes to a point David made a few times and I never responded to, which is the concern about vote splitting, for example. That's why I've always advocated the independence movement needs to be nonpartisan. In the very same way, because then what happens is the political parties get to decide whether they support it as a concept and a policy, right? As opposed to vote splitting. I really think it should be nonpartisan. We did the same thing. Tamara will remember one of her first tests as to whether she could trust me in Ottawa was a couple days on the ground and during the protest, and O'Toole had resigned, and I'm drawing a mental blank. The interim leader Candice Bergen, thank you, had just been elected, and Tamara got this phone call that Bergen wanted to meet her at an A&W, and I was like, no, this is a photo op. They're going to want to make it partisan. This protest cannot be partisan. It's got to be about principles. And Tamara, that was her position. And it was the right position to not politicize it. I think the freedom movement needs, or the independence movement, which is a freedom movement, needs to stay nonpartisan and show your voice so loud and so persuasively that any politician that wants to have a hope in hell of getting elected again will support independence.
David, do you have anything to add? No? Okay. David, some of the things that we want to fix incrementally, you talked about. And I think you're right when you say Alberta has not fought back as a natural reaction. We're not using all the levers that we sometimes could. But I look at the Senate, for example, appointed by Trudeau and Carney. We'll never be able to do that. We've tried. We've elected senators in waiting, and they just wait. And much worse, I think, are the courts. The provincial courts are appointed by the province, but the more senior courts, the superior courts, are appointed by Ottawa. And no matter how you fight, I think that, or what would you say to the challenge of having so many of our institutions handpicked by people distant, partisan, and hostile to us?
I think that this goes, I guess, to the point of tactics, which is there are a series of battles that we can fight, but we can't fight them all at the same time. I was stunned that when we had the federal government, we didn't fill the Senate seats that were open. That's on us. And I hate to say it, but it sounds like a theme. I'm not a negative. I wear a blue jersey. I give a lot to the party, as you know. I quit. I am convinced that a conservative perspective is the one that will prevail, but we make a lot of dumb mistakes. And one of them was we didn't take advantage of when we actually ran the show in Ottawa, we didn't take full advantage. So, not having greater control of the Senate, that's entirely on us. Now, structurally, we should have more seats in the Senate than what we currently have, and I think that's an argument that can be made over time and that we need to make over time if we believe enough in federalism to want to fix it while we're in it. I guess is the most the best way to sort of say it, respect. But I think that for us as a province, if you said there are about 20 fights that we have in front of us, there are 4 or 5 that are ahead of us right now, and conservative movement has the ability to shift the game in British Columbia and get this stuffed shirt Ebbie out and get solid conservatives in. We need to have the kind of conservative movement that can join with Saskatchewan, join with BC right now. We don't have to wait until we complete some sort of broader goal of being more independent to start to win that game now, right? And I think that when we choose our fights carefully and we're tactical and we play to win and we win, then what happens is what's happened the last 4 years. The rest of the country has gone negative in terms of GDP. Alberta's gone positive. We've led this nation for the last 4 years. How did that happen? We imposed conservative ideas and it led to prosperity in Alberta. Everywhere else, they're falling apart. And so I believe that we can convince people in BC of that. Saskatchewan's already doing a great job of that. I don't think we have to pick every fight. I agree that things are stacked against us, but I think that if we organize around the fights we can win right now, we get further ahead, and we get further ahead in a way that better positions us if Keith wins the argument. If you follow my approach, winning, then when the moment comes where we say this is untenable, we're having that argument, that fight from an even stronger position with more momentum.
Keith?
Yeah. So the Senate. It's a patronage pit. When I had the misfortune of being subpoenaed to be in Ottawa for the public inquiry into the Invocation of the Emergencies Act, and Tamara Leach and Eva Chipiuk and the rest of us, Tom Marazzo, Chris Barber, were all stuck in Ottawa for another 7 weeks in the fall of 2022. Turned out this long stay hotel we were in, there was a whole bunch of senators staying there too, because you can stay there for months. And I saw them at the bar every single night getting drunk. They all become alcoholics because at the end of the day, they know they're not doing anything. It's all a charade. How many votes, how many pieces of legislation has the Senate stopped? None. They delayed 2. That was it. It's a patronage pit. All right, Wilson, well, let's reform it. Okay, 35 years ago, I went to a public town hall meeting put on by the just emerged Reform Party, and I saw my first speech by Preston Manning. It was at the Edmonton Inn Hotel in Edmonton. And wow, I love Preston, I really do. What a great guy. Let's, Alberta wants in. Remember that? Well, guess what? We tried that for 35 years. Again, I have a huge amount of respect for Preston Manning, but unfortunately, he's living proof that doesn't work. So, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Preston Manning wrote a very surprising op-ed in the Globe and Mail, of all places, a couple of months ago, saying if Mark Carney were elected, that could be the last prime minister of a united Canada. He was so worried that that would be the first domino that would lead to Alberta separation. And this is a guy who really took all the energy out of the separatist movement 40 years ago, 30 years ago. I thought that was fascinating. Okay, well, thank you to our panel. We're not done yet. My friend Sheila's got the microphone. Sheila's done literally every job here today.
Everyone.
I thank you very much. Sheila's great. She's the same way at the company, too, by the way. The hardest worker. Anyway, thank you, Sheila, for everything you do. So, Sheila, would you go around, and I'd like to encourage our questioners to keep the questions brief, and let's keep the answers brief, too, to see how many we can get through. Thank you, Sheila.
All right. I'll start here.
Really simple question for David. You seem to be a really patient man, and you've used the term over the course of time several times in when you were speaking. So how much longer for you personally before you reach your tipping point and you say enough's enough?
Great question.
It's a great question. Look, I guess I meant what I said. I can't believe that we run the conservative movement in Alberta. We run Alberta, and yet we came within a few points of losing this province to the left. Walked through downtown Calgary, and it's a disaster. We've lost that city council to the left. My impatience is with us winning. It's not a structural impatience. I'm not impatient for us to be either, outside a federalist structure. I don't think we want to be in a Republican constitution. A province in Canada, technically, constitutionally, has far more autonomy than a state in the United States. I don't want to be a 51st state. Not under a Joe Biden, I don't want to be a 51st state. I don't want to be in a state where the president can call the National Guard and just overrule the state. But provinces are far more independent, have far more power. Premiers are far more powerful. But as a conservative movement, my impatience is with us losing Calgary and Edmonton to these people that have no business being in government. It's with us getting so close to losing the provincial election. And so my desire is focused on, if we can create that extraordinary opportunity and we can show that the hearts and minds strategy has led to majorities of Albertans saying, you know what, let's try it on our own. I think we can do it. I think we can do it. I'm not a pessimist about Alberta resourcefulness, resilience, capacity, ambition, inspiration, the ability to deliver. What bugs me is we have that right now in Alberta. Why are we losing in some of these places we should own? When we can do that, when we win that hearts and minds argument, then I'm ready to go to the moon. We can take it anywhere we want to take it. But right now, when we're losing core battles we should be winning, I'm nervous about us getting ambitious about winning a war when we're losing battles we should be winning.
Okay.
My question's for Keith. I haven't heard anybody give a legal timeline from the date of a 51% referendum yes to the date we declare ourselves a country. Can you give us an idea?
Yeah, that's not something that's mapped out, but there is a process. So the requirement is after the, if there's a successful referendum, clear majority, clear question, then the provinces, the federal government, and First Nations are required to go into good faith negotiations. And those negotiations are not going to go smooth. Just like the negotiations on all my major litigation files with sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars at stake for the parties, and parties who hate one another don't go smooth. But we always manage to get it resolved. And so it will take time, but it's also going to occur in a context where Alberta is likely going to be simultaneously being courted by others, potentially the United States, offering trade deals, other things, trade deals with other countries. And as Dr. Modi has pointed out, the Supreme Court of Canada anticipated that the negotiations might not go smoothly and they might not be done in good faith. And that's why paragraph 155 of the Supreme Court of Canada reference case from 1998 is so important, because it basically says, to translate the legalese, well, if the parties actually don't engage, namely the other parties, other than the province becoming a country, in good faith, they can opt for international recognition instead, much like Taiwan and other places have. So it would be open for the United States to recognize Alberta as a sovereign. It would be open for OPEC countries to recognize, and so on. So there is no timeline. It'll be a difficult, ruckus, very interesting period. There'll be politics, there'll be events going on, but there's no statutory timeline.
So this is really a double question. So 20 years ago, I would have totally agreed with David Legg, completely. And I was in love with Canada, and I felt there was hope. But I've not been asleep for 20 years. So it's a double edged. Canada has changed. So here's two things. Can you cite one example of a federal government that actually clearly demonstrated that it wants to play ball with Alberta? And the second part is this. Given that current government in Ottawa, I don't want to use bad language, why would we want to stay in Canada? This is not the place that any of us here were born in, even if you're only 16.
Thanks for that question. Look, I think Stephen Harper ran a great government. It could have been better, but it was pretty good. I think it's extraordinary that Alberta started a little startup party and 15 years later took over all of Ottawa and ended up running the country for almost 10 years. I think we have that potential again. Our economy is bigger. We are profoundly more conservative as a province than we were 15 years ago. I think Danielle Smith is a great premier. I know not everybody shares that opinion. Look, I came back and people are like, oh, you're a Kenny guy. I'm not a Kenny guy. I'm an Alberta guy. I'm a kid whose parents immigrated here, who chose to be here because this was the best place in the world my dad could possibly imagine, where he could go hunting and fishing a lot and raise 4 boys. And I grew up loving it, and I came back to fight for what I believe is the kind of place I want my son to feel like he can grow up in. And I think there's a lot to play for here. And I think we actually, in an extraordinary moment, we went from being a startup party that was a mockery to running the country. Did we do it perfectly? No, but we did it. I think these imposters that are currently in Ottawa have a failed political philosophy that is obviously failing all Canadians. That we have the worst GDP in the OECD. We have the worst GDP in the G7. The next worst one is Germany, which is 10 times better than ours, right? There's no way you can look. We have worse crime rates. We have the lowest happiness index. Almost everything that we had 10 years ago has been reversed because it's a failed political philosophy, and failed political philosophies fail. They leave people worse off. They leave people disenfranchised. They leave people poorer. And the reason that that happens is because what they believe is not true in the real world. Their weird political, environmentalist, green, WEF philosophy fails in the real world because it's not true and it's not honest. When we bring a conservative philosophy to bear wherever we are, it's not just optimism, it's that it actually does work. We brought it to bear here in Alberta. We reversed the 4 years of the NDP decimation of this province. I was looking at it mostly economically. We're back. And we're coming back stronger. I think we can do that for Canada. I think it's our philosophy, and maybe this is one of the distinctions. I really believe that the conservative worldview, the conservative philosophy offers hope to people, it offers prosperity, it offers an opportunity. It's not always executed perfectly, but that's the aspiration. And so what worries me is not whether or not we get to a point of separating from the rest of Canada sooner or later. What worries me is whether the architecture of Alberta is separate from Canada is less important than who's governing Alberta. I don't want a separate Alberta if it's governed by the NDP. And I don't want to see an Alberta where the NDP could possibly take government again. And so I agree with you and I understand the sentiment and I share it. I came back to fight against it. I still believe that we have a lot of fight in us and a lot of opportunities to win a lot of battles without going all the way to a separatist discussion right away, and specifically not dividing our party in Alberta while we're on our way there. I think we've got lots of room to grow.
Too many people in Canada, particularly Quebec and Ontario, do not see the world through the lens that David and I do. They don't recognize that greater prosperity, happiness, success, achievement results through governments that implement conservative policies. I remember over a year ago, people getting all excited on Twitter Spaces and things, pointing out that it looked like it was going to be a landslide for the federal Conservatives because they were at 47% in the polls, and then I would pop into the Twitter space and rain on the parade, not with dewaterized water, but real water. And I would say, all right, but the Liberals are at 32 and the NDP's at 23, so that's 55. In other words, there's more people in Canada that share that view of the world, the view that I should not have to do things and take risks. The government's going to keep me safe. And they're going to look after me, and I want them to look after me, and I want them to make all the decisions. There's more and more people in central Canada that share that viewpoint, as the last election just demonstrated.
My question is for both Keith and David. What I'm hearing is what a very wise man once said, a house divided against itself will fall. What would be your top 3 points that you would say to us as people on the ground that we should speak to those around us that would provide unity on the question of Alberta being prosperous?
I can go first. The first is to help people who aren't decided to understand the base facts. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. There's still people that think that crown land means federal crown. You know, no, over 80% of the crown land in Alberta is provincial crown land. Only the balance is federal, which is Indian reserves, army bases, national parks. In other words, help them understand the base facts about how prosperous Alberta and how resource-rich we are. And also, too, there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about the extremely limited role that the federal government actually has. Guess how many hospitals the federal government has in all of Canada? 0. You know, outside of a national park and the territories and a military base, guess how many trees the federal government's Department of Forestry has control over? 0. Like, I could keep going. People just have this misconception that the federal government has a far larger role in your life, in making sure your life is stable and prosperous or well, than they really do. But they sure have a big role in screwing it up. And I guess that would be the third point.
Look, I think if there's 3 things to do, I think one of the things is let's make sure we win the next provincial election. And let's start to take back these city councils, these school boards, and these hospital boards. You know, I think here's the thing that's interesting. When you sort of read political philosophy, you find out that all of the weirdo leftists who had terrible personal lives, by the way, and lived there, any weirdo leftist political philosopher that lived anything close to their philosophy had the worst lives, right? And then you've got these heroes, John Locke, Edmund Burke, and others. But one of the ideas in conservative political philosophy is actually a very unique idea, which is the opposite of the left. One of those core ideas, life is not about politics. Life is about your faith. Life is about your family. Life is about the free exchange of ideas, the ability to disagree and go have a beer. Life is about sports. Life is about living a good life for your kids, for your grandkids. It's about creating a business, it's about employing people, it's about doing things. There's an enormous part of the fight between conservatives and liberals in political philosophy that's conservatives saying, get the hell out of my life, right? Your politics doesn't belong here. You don't have the right to define these things in my life. And I think that one of the great things about Alberta, partly because of our heritage in farming and ranching, is that people understand this intuitively. I think a lot of the conservative movement in Alberta is very intuitive. So the first point I would make is that part of our conservative philosophy is that we don't make politics personal. You extend love and affection to the weird family members that vote NDP, right? You treat people with respect. You create the conditions for dissent that's fair-minded and thoughtful. It's the left that always wants to burn bridges and act like any act of protest is seditious. That's the left-wing playbook. It's not the conservative playbook, right? Conduct our politics is a tone of generosity. It's a tone that doesn't treat everything as if it's a political football. It's a tone that treats people with respect, and I think that's the tone that ultimately wins hearts and minds. Second thing I would say is we've got a lot of small battles to win in a lot of schools, a lot of hospitals, a lot of civic associations, and that it's those things that Edmund Burke would say, focus on that stuff, win hearts and minds there, because everything comes out of those little platoons. And that's what will really make Alberta the kind of conservative culture that thrives, but also just full of communities that are better places to live than anywhere else in the world.
Thank you. You know what? I propose we take 4 more questions because I think there's a lot of interest in our panel. I see there's a lot of questions, and this was the last thing on the agenda. So unless the guests object, I propose we go 4 more questions, and then each speaker will have a 5-minute summary of their point of view. Does that sound okay, everybody? Okay, Sheila. So question number 1 of 4. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is the way I see it.
Question.
The question has to start with a small statement. In Greater Toronto Area, there are more seats in Parliament than all of Western Canada. And the Conservative Party is always been lukewarm because they have to pander to the predominantly Liberal voter in the East. There is no way that this country is going to change unless there's equal seats in every province. And my question to you is, how do we get there? Because without it, there's no way this is working for us to stay.
You can't get there from here.
Okay, next question.
Question.
Question for Keith. What happens if the House of Commons says the question on the referendum isn't clear?
We do it again.
My question for you, gents, is why do we have to have the same system in the new Republic of Alberta? Why can't we do something like Switzerland does and have it so that each member of Parliament is independent and they can be a referendum can take one member of Parliament out if he's not doing what the constituents want, so that they have that sort of thing in Switzerland. And why do we have to think that we have to have a system where you have two sides fighting all the time and the bankers walk away with the money? George Carlin had it figured out years ago.
Well, we don't. The reality is that the process allows Alberta to start with a blank slate and processes put in place for the citizenry to help craft and design the Constitution, the governmental structure. We could do an interim process of carrying the current structures forward while we work together to build what we could think and reach some kind of agreement on is the best form of government possible. We wouldn't be constrained.
Go ahead. These were quicker than I thought, so let's take a couple more. And I see a couple fellows who had their hands up here.
These two gents in
Go
the
ahead,
front.
Sheila.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm an Albertan. I don't recognize my own country anymore. I see the mass immigration is really scary in this country, and I was just wondering, with an independent Alberta, what does that process look like? What happens to all the people that the federal government brought into our province when the referendum question goes ahead and we are separating?
Like, sorry to clarify, are you talking about temporary foreign workers and students?
Yes, I'm talking about the people who are not Canadian citizens, not Alberta citizens, the people who were brought into our country just in the last 5 years under the mass immigration. What happens to them?
Well, first of all, in order to vote in a referendum, and this may not be your question because I think it's got multiple aspects, is you have to be 18 years of age, you have to be a Canadian citizen, that's current law, and you have to be ordinarily resident in Alberta. So if you don't check those boxes, they wouldn't have the right to vote. But one of the things that would happen, I think, is Alberta as an independent nation because I do think we have a very defined and recognizable culture and identity, is they would have the opportunity to share and enjoy that identity.
I'm not sure if you got if I understood the question, I'm not sure if you answered it. If there are people in Canada who do not have tenure because of citizenship, and if Alberta becomes independent, what happens to those temporary foreign workers, international students, et cetera? I just think you might have...
So from that aspect, that would be a policy decision of the new government. They could honor all of the existing systems. They could honor them, say, for a period of time. They could say, no more, we're shutting the doors for now. Like we used to actually control immigration, remarkable. And most countries in the world still do, because they call themselves countries. So, I mean, it would be open to the government, the new government of the new country of Alberta, to decide whether they're going to grandfather people, whether they're going to transition, and when new policies would go in.
Look, just a comment on this. I think one of the worst things that I've seen happen in Canada in the last decade has been, we used to be renowned for having one of the smartest, talent-driven immigration systems in the world. We're the envy of the world. Europe was failing, Canada was winning, the US was watching what we were doing. They were even looking at adjusting their H-1B program to shape around the Canadian war for talent strategy, where immigrants were coming in, being carefully vetted, and becoming immediately accretive economically. The Liberal government has adopted a wide open borders policy that has been destroying our GDP. It's been terrible for the people that have come in, and there are 4 or 5 categories of this, but it's also been totally taken advantage of by criminal syndicates and terror syndicates who actually, and you can see this on social media, by the way. They actually show people step by step how to defraud our system and how to defraud the welfare in our system. That complete mismanagement by this government is one of the worst things they could have done, because not only has it destroyed the economy, but it's created deep resentment between people of ethnically different backgrounds and made it harder to come into this country as an immigrant that deserves to be here and is choosing Canada, right? They've completely destroyed the fabric of the country, and it's gotten worse in the last 2 years. So this is something that this current government under Carney has got to address, and the current immigration minister is totally in over her head. She's got no idea what she's doing. So this is going to become a real battle line in the next year.
With municipal elections happening later this year, what is required to enable Alberta independence-minded councillors and mayors for these communities?
When people are running, communicate with them and tell them your expectation and ask them to be vocal about their support for independence. And hopefully they will, and those will be the ones that will be rewarded with the most votes and acquire that which they seek, which is power.
My simple response to that one is just get good people that are qualified into these positions, in these seats. There's, you could elect dog catchers in some of these positions, right? We just have to get better at just getting good people that are qualified, that are thoughtful, good people in these roles. I'm actually talking with some guys about coming up with a much better data analytics strategy and starting to work with some of the Republicans who have developed really smart tactics around this so we can take back our cities. Because it's not just the independence thing, it's like fix the streets, right? Fix the terrible city planning. Fix the outrageous bureaucracy and the work from home idiocy of these bureaucrats. Like, there's just so much stuff to actually fix that beyond the particular position on independence, it's like good people coming in and reorganizing cities, cutting taxes, becoming competitive, becoming leaner, smarter government, digitized services. There's 100 things to do. Just back good people, go door to door for them, get them in there. 5 years from now, they'll be the mayor of that city, and we can start to see a renaissance.
My question is for both of you guys. In 1963, we chased God out of the head of the government. What's your opinion on bringing God back in as the head of the government, for government to be answering to him, and then mostly the people, the government answering to the people as well?
We got a bad echo on that one. Sheila, can you translate?
The question was about removing God from government in 1963. Okay.
In the Constitution.
I don't know if this is a question either one of them can or will answer.
Maybe not.
Yeah. The question was about removing God from the government in 1963.
Well, I mean, if to the extent that that's a definable moment and an action can be reversed, but that would be a policy decision of whatever government as to what role and symbols and values they want to hold out. I mean, I'm old enough to remember doing the Lord's Prayer every morning, and we sang "O Canada." I don't know if you're allowed to do either of those anymore. But.
One of the things I find astounding is that the fear of the left of hearing God or Jesus, or, they're so fearful. I don't know what it is, right? Our Constitution does not give atheists a veto over free religious expression or getting together and worshiping, right? And if you're a football team and you want to say a quick prayer before you go out on the field, go for it. And let's defend that stuff in court, because this idiocy of wall of separation between church and state, that was a letter to Danbury Baptist Association assuring the church that some government guy couldn't come into their church, right? That's not in the Constitution of the United States. That was a letter from the president to a church saying, trust me, I know you're Baptists and we're all Anglicans, but we're not going to mess with you, right? So the left is desperate to try and eradicate history. This is why that's the team that wants to pull down statues. That's the team that will tell lies and allow churches to be burned and there'll be no recourse, right? There's an animus that sits at the heart of any political philosophy, and there's a deep political philosophical roots that are deeply anti-clerical. It comes from the French revolts, and it's deeply anti-Christian, it's deeply anti-God, and there's still strands of that. The best way to fight that is say a prayer, go to church, worship with people, and let the atheists come for you and defeat them in court.
Great. Well, Sheila, thanks for doing the Q&A from the audience. I'd like now to invite our panelists to have 5 minutes in wrap-up comments, concluding comments. You can do it from the chair or you can do it from the podium.
Okay, I do what Keith tells me to do. He told me to stand up. I was starting to slouch here. I was getting comfortable having my opinions on religious freedom. I'll stand here. Look, I don't need 5 minutes. I think we've both. I used more than my time to start with, so I'll cut my time. I just want to say thank you for including me. When Ezra said you got to come, you got to defend federalism, I was like, oh no, And you got to defend it against Keith. I'm like, oh, really? No, let's not do it. And then to show up and the military music is playing, and I thought I was going to get one cigarette and a prayer before I could exercise my religious freedoms before Keith shot me publicly with some smart comments. But I think we've got a lot to play for. I am so thankful, so grateful to God and my dad, family, for being a kid that was able to grow up in Lethbridge, Alberta. I went to the school that was right next to us. I ended up having opportunities. I went to the U of L. I had opportunities to go overseas. I was able to invest well and do a bunch of things. I owe so much to this place. And I know a lot of you built this place. When my dad came here, he was stunned at how generous people were to him as an immigrant trying to get started, get things going. And I grew up loving the place. I grew up, like Ezra for some reason, and Keith, wanting to fight for what we thought would make this place great, even when we were young and dumb. And so I just want to say thank you to you. Thank you for being the kind of people that come out on an afternoon because you care so much about this place and you want to give back and you want to get it right. And I want to thank Keith for sending me a very kind note last night saying, I'm going to kill you on stage tomorrow. No, he didn't. He sent me a very nice note saying, look, I'm not going to cross-examine you even though Ezra wants me to,
That happened.
Yeah, that actually happened. And I'm going to wear a tie. So I brought one, but I left it on the table back there because I thought I looked smoother without one on. But thank you very much for hearing my perspective on these issues. And thank you again for everything you've done to build this great province and make it a place worth fighting for.
Each one of you is at a moment in history where that which is before us is so potentially dark and troubling. The direction that this federal government wants to take for your future, the future of your children, your neighbors and your friends and your businesses is serious. We know that. Just hang on, I'm talking. But what is absolutely remarkable is we have an opportunity that may come once ever, not just in our lifetime, but in the history of this planet, where we have so many Albertans who now know that there's a legal pathway forward. There's a legal way to do this. We don't have to take up arms. We can do it legally. And know that fundamentally who we are and the value of our worth, not just as individuals, but as a province and our resources. So if we work together, as we work as individuals as well, we have the opportunity to methodically help others. I see a third. The third that will never change their mind. They want their government checks. They were so happy to pay that carbon tax because they got a rebate. Wow. Oh my God. I'm going to market my dewaterized water to those guys. Sell a lot. Shares. And I'll have a special sale on February 30th, half off. So there's that third. But then there's us third. And we're already in the bag or the can, like we're voting. It's that middle third we need to focus on. Don't shout at them. Don't tell them they're stupid. Listen to them. Be patient. Don't try and convince them in the first discussion. Take your time. Help them discover things on their own. Pascal said, people are far more persuaded by ideas that come to them on their own than ideas put to them by others. Ask questions. Oh, so what would happen if we could sell the $1 trillion worth of oil and gas we have? How much dollars is $1 trillion? How many thousands of millions of dollars is that? Help people understand the opportunity that's before them as Albertans. Be respectful, be careful, and I am very optimistic that we can do this. And we also need to keep something else in mind, and I've said this to a few people today in sidebars, which is, to use a hockey analogy, we're on the ice, and guess what? The other team isn't here yet. And what I mean by that, the closer we get to success, the harder the people who are going to lose our hard-earned money that they take from us are going to fight. The dirtier they're going to get. I'm part of me is almost excited about whatever scandal they're going to concoct about me. You know, you're going to read about it somewhere. It's going to be all BS, but you know, it's going to get nasty. They're going to fight back. So that means we got to get smarter, and we got to skate harder, and we got to be careful. But I think the facts are on our side, the truth is on our side, and if we all keep moving forward to this common vision that we have, we will be successful. Thank you.